pleasure to welcome our very distinguished professor of semiotics, the wonderful, fascinating keynote speaker, Massimo LEONE, who is many things, among other professor of philosophy, of status of communication, of cultural semiotics, and visual semiotics at the Department of Philosophy and Educational Sciences at the University of Turin. He's a part-timer and an associate member of Cambridge Digital Humanities. Among other, he's adjunct professor at the University of Caracas in Venezuela, and he has single-authored many books, as well as he has an impressive winning of a 2018 ERC grant. He is editor of the editor-in-chief of Lexia, the semiotic journal of the Center for Interdisciplinary Research and Communication, and among other, he's one of the co-editor of the book Isaki di Lexia, and we all know his ERC grant, fascinating projects and research on face studies. But today, he's going to talk to us about faces. Let me see the exact title.
If I am here on the...
Oh, great. Faces and filters, the semiotics of digital appearances.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. For this wonderful introduction, and many thanks to my friend and colleague Sorin for creating all this for us together with his counterpart, female counterpart, Paula. So I'm really thankful. So the talk today will propose an archaeological genealogy of multimodal ideologies. I should maybe use the... So the talk today will propose an archaeological genealogy of multimodal ideologies that stretches from the remotest times of our civilization until the present digital era. It will do so through exploring the multifaceted nature of the Maori facial tattoo, known as moko or amoko, as a form of writing, multimodal writing, and its complex historical trajectory. So I've prepared a multimodal index of my presentation, and this is it. So this is my presentation. It is actually a graphic work of art that has been prepared by a graphic designer called Alessandro Buonacorsi, who has taken my talk and has prepared this beautiful, beautiful visual introduction. But and it works much better than the verbal introduction, of course. So, initially come across by the first British colonizers, the moko became an object of colonial curiosity, invoking both fascination and misunderstanding. Herman Melville's portrayal of Queequeg in Moby Dick further propelled the moko into the literary realm, highlighting its significance as a defining feature of a character, while also inviting speculation on human exteriority and the intricate balance between revealing and concealing one's identity. For centuries, the writing on the skin, which was later to be called tattoo following the encounter with Oceanian cultures, faced stigmatization due to its divergence from the semiotic ideologies of Judaism and subsequently Christianity. These belief systems, in different ways, perceived writing on the skin as a potential source of idolatry, leading to the marginalization of the moko and its cultural significance. In the contemporary era, the Maori tattoo has experienced appropriation and exploitation, including its digital manifestation through facial filters, we'll see that, However, it has also emerged as a powerful medium for reclaiming cultural dignity and pride. Maori individuals have embraced the moko as a means of asserting their unique identity, challenging the historical stigmatization and fostering cultural resilience. This talk will shed light on the journey of the moko from its initial encounter with the British colonizers to its present-day resurgence as a symbol of cultural revitalization. By examining its historical, literary, and cultural dimensions, this study aims to deepen our understanding of the Maori facial tattoo as both a form of multimodal writing on the face, hello, yes, this is my fan calling me, yeah, and a vehicle for personal and collective expression. So we'll start from Melville, quotation from Melville, and here you have a picture of the actor impersonating Queequeg, Moby Dick's Queequeg, in a movie dated 1956, Friedrich von Leeuwenhoek. So, first quotation, I was all eagerness to see his face, but he kept it averted for some time while employed in unlacing the bag's mouth. In a renowned passage extracted from Melville's timeless novel Moby Dick, the impending unveiling of the features belonging to the barbaric harpooner Queequeg, barbaric between commas, serves as the locus of tension within the narrative. The focal point resides in the apprehensive anticipation experienced by Ishmael, the concerned protagonist, who finds himself eager to witness the countenance of his unfamiliar roommate at the Spouterine. However, a nuanced semantic interplay engenders an intensification of suspense. While Ishmael passionately awaits the revelation of Queequeg's still concealed face, the harpooner, in a peculiar twist, directs his attention toward the act of unlatching the mouth of his own purse. Strikingly, in the very instant that Queequeg exposes the contents of his bag, the enigma surrounding his visage is simultaneously unraveled before the astonished gaze of Ishmael. Second quote, this accomplished, however, he turned around when, good heavens, what a sight! Such a face! It was a dark, purplish. This is my second fan calling me. What a sight! Such a face! It was a dark, purplish yellow color, here and there stuck over with large, blackish-looking squares. The exclamation that escapes Ishmael's lips encapsulates his profound dismay upon confronting the countenance he ardently sought to decipher. Ishmael's eagerness to read the face stems from his desire to discern the individual with whom he would be sharing lodgings and spending the night. Implicit in this endeavor is the expectation of encountering a spontaneous and genuine manifestation of character and intentions. However, the moment the visage is unveiled, it immediately captivates the viewer with features that semiotics would categorize as plastic in nature. First and foremost, the face exhibits a color distinct from that attributed to the white race. Additionally, conspicuous dark squares occupy prominent positions on the countenance. Both these features evoke a foreboding sense, serving as ominous portents of future events. Third quotation. Yes, it's just as I thought. He's a terrible bedfellow. He's been in a fight, got dreadfully cut, and here he is, just from the surgeon. End of quote. In this instance, Melville astutely extracts an inference from a long-standing visual imagery whether consciously or unconsciously, which encompasses a semiotic framework pervading human cultures throughout history. The foundation of this framework revolves around what semioticians classify as a semi-symbolic system. The system comprises two contrasting elements: the unblemished, smooth skin, particularly that which adorns the face, and the marked, branded skin, characterized by incisions and cuts. The dichotomy between smoothness and striations, Deleuzian of course, often assumes a moral connotation, with unscattered facial skin connoting goodness, while the presence of incisions signifies evil and violence. In this context, Ishmael instinctively interprets the prominent black squares on Queequeg's face as indicators of a dreadful roommate, hinting at his involvement in altercations and the reception of stab wounds, possibly in the recent past. Furthermore, the visage bears a striking resemblance to that of a person emerging from an operating room, prompting Ishmael to speculate on the timeline of these events. Yet, this initial interpretation, influenced by the facial stereotypes ingrained in the broader culture, is soon superseded by a more meticulous scrutiny, as we shall explore in great detail. Fourth quotation. And here you have a picture of another impersonation of Moby Dick, this time in an opera inspired by Herman Melville's Moby Dick in Dallas Opera, Texas, 30th of April 2010, sorry. We'll see that there is a big difference between these impersonation and these impersonation. But fourth quotation first. But at that moment, he chanced to turn his face so towards the light that I plainly saw they could not be sticking pasters at all, those black squares on his cheeks. They were stains of some sort or other. Melville craftily portrays the gradual process by which Ishmael's gaze meticulously examines and unravels the enigmatic countenance of Queequeg. Initially, the conspicuous black squares are not immediately identified as scars. Instead, they are considered to be potentially spontaneous stains. However, as the illumination intensifies and the object of Ishmael's gaze absorbs the augmented light, a subsequent interpretation unfolds. These markings are recognized not as inadvertent stains, but rather deliberate and purposeful imprints. Intriguingly, they do not bear the characteristics of knife or scalpel incisions, but rather resemble inked marks, suggesting a connection to a deliberate act of inscription. Fifth quote. At first, I knew not what to make of this, but soon an inkling of the truth occurred to me. You know, Melville is really fantastic. There is this word in the sentence, inkling, that is impossible to translate in other languages, because it is a word that at the same time in English refers to ink, so the dye, the color that we use to write, and to a sudden idea. I had a professor of Latin American literature when I was at the University of Siena. He was already retired. He was very famous in Italy. His name was Elamir Zola, and he used to ask all these PhD students, so how many times in a year do you read all Melville again? So this was his question. But anyway, Melville's deft choice of the term inkling holds profound significance within its usage. This word conveys not only an idea or a tentative hypothesis akin to what Peirce would describe as an abduction, but it also encompasses the concept of dye and the etymology of it. Thus, what initially appeared as scars or stains is revealed to be the remnants of written expression, Consequently, the recognition of the written traces swiftly triggers a recollection within Ishmael's memory, invoking a process of reading and interpretation. Sixth fundamental quote: I remember the story of a white man, a whale man too, who, falling among the cannibals, had been tattooed by them. I concluded that this harpooner, in the course of his distant voyages, must have met with a similar adventure. And what is it, thought I, after all? It's only his outside. A man can be honest in any sort of skin. At that time it was a revolutionary sentence. The human skin merely constitutes the outermost layer of an individual, while the true essence of a person's honesty transcends the superficial appearances. Melville's enduring message continues to reverberate throughout the ages, anchored in the reality that the book in question, the book that Ishmael recalls from, actually exists. In 2011, the comparative scholar Geoffrey D. Sambor, who is now at Amherst College, published a book entitled Whip Scars and Tattoos, The Last of Mohicans, Moby Dick, and the Maori. Within this volume, Sambor convincingly asserts the hypothesis that Melville's characterization of Queequeg draws inspiration from the personal history of Tepe Kupe. Tepe Kupe is going to be the great protagonist of our talk. Tepe Kupe, a historical figure featured in a book by George Lilly Craig called The New Zealanders, published in 1830. Who was Craig? Craig was a Scottish author who lived all of his life in Britain and then in Scotland, but he wrote the first book about New Zealand without ever moving from Great Britain and the New Zealanders. So, Tepe Kupe emerges as a prominent figure in Maori history, embodying the esteemed positions of both Rangatira, he was a leader, he was a chief, and military leader within the Ngati Toa tribe. He got involved in wars, in battles, important events in Maori history. But the most notable episode from the point of view of England in Tepe Kupe's life occurred in 1824, when he fearlessly secured passage on a ship bound for England. He was the first Maori to visit England. During his time, he had the distinct privilege of being introduced to George IV, the king, acquired equestrian skills. He designed his own moko, the traditional Maori facial tattoo, and having his portrait captured in paint, thus immortalizing his visage for posterity. And this is him, Tepe Kupe, portraited in a portrait dated 1826 by John Harry Sylvester. So is this a portrait? Is this not a portrait? It is an intercultural, multimodal portrait, as we shall see. So we read from Craig's book. Some very curious information was accidentally, quotation 7, obtained from Tupai on the subject of the Amoko. The sketch of his head, from which the accompanying engraving is copied, was taken while he was at Liverpool by his acquaintance John Sylvester. And Tupai took the greatest interest in the progress of the performance, but he was above all solicitous that the marks upon his face should be accurately copied in the drawing. End of quote. The meticulous sketch referenced to by Craig resulted into an exotic watercolor representation that is currently housed, this watercolor that you see, in the National Library of Australia. As I said before, it was executed around 1826 by the skilled artist John Harry Sylvester. This artwork masterfully captures the facial expression and upper body of Tupei Coupe, meticulously adorned in the fashionable garments of the era. Let's do some semiotics of fashion, which is very important. We should do some historical semiotics of fashion, not only concentrating on contemporary fashion. Noteworthy attention to the detail within the watercolor composition highlights Tupei Coupe's selection of a distinguished black girdle reminiscent of the middle-class gentleman's fashion choices, aimed at projecting an elevated social status through sartorial expression. Such endeavors often resulted in the emergence of the dandy archetype. Tupei Coupe's ensemble further comprises a cotton shirt with a tall, erect collar exuding an aura of sophistication. This is accompanied by a broad cravat, tastefully tied in a gentle bow, lending an additional touch of elegance to his ensemble. So the conventional and fashionable nature of the attire starkly contrasts with the exoticism of Tupei Coupe's countenance. And there's a stark contrast here between the clothes that are the same clothes of the Bridgerton, if you have seen the series, isn't it? The same epoch. And also the hair, because this is the typical hair that men would have in the 1820s, in the 1820s in England. Curls were in fashion, and men and women alike would use pomades and other devices to have this perfectly curly but composed hair. So you have this typically, let's say, Bridgerton hair and Bridgerton clothes, and then you have on this face the scandal of the Moko. So, according to Craig, who describes the portrait seance in his book, Tupei Coupe himself presided over the correctness of the painterly reproduction of his countenance, a quote number 9. The figure, he explained, not being by any means a mere work of fancy, but formed according to certain rules of art which determined the direction of every line. It constituted, in fact, the distinctive mark of the individual, end of quote. During that period, it was widely recognized among the Maori that the facial Moko held a significance beyond mere decoration. It served as a means of etching individuality onto one's visage. From a contemporary semiotic standpoint, one could argue that while British portraiture, as Francesco Piluso had just underlined in his talk on the portrait, represented the face as a proclamation of uniqueness, the Maori perspective considered the face as a physical canvas for an enduring inscription of that very singularity. Whereas the British elevated prominent figures by immortalizing their faces on canvas, the Maori transformed notable countenances into intricate self-portraits using their faces as living diagrams. Moreover, Craig's account, my third fan is calling, I have a crowd of fans all over the world. Moreover, Craig's account of the meticulousness of Tupei Coupe, whom the author calls Tupai, in front of his own portrait, is even more pronounced, focusing on one area of the image in particular, which is, according to you, the most important area in this diagram. Where is the most important area in this facial diagram? Very good. We see that Sid is an expert on facial tattoo and facescapes. No? Indeed. In one part, writes Craig, of that on his own face, the mark just over the upper part of his nose, Tupai constantly called his name. That was his name. Saying, European man, write with pen in his name, Tupai's name is here, pointing to his forehead. End of quote. Within the intricate diagram of the moko, the tribal facial tattoo, resides an inscription that surpasses mere group membership or individuality, extending into a realm of indexicality that transcends comparisons to the iconicity of portraiture. Particularly, the elaborate pattern of tattooed lines positioned on the forehead, just above the nose, assumes the role of a signature. The Pei-Kupe contends that this marking affirms not only the individual's uniqueness, but also their spatial and temporal presence. It serves as a sign asserting the social and physical existence of the individual before their interlocutors and community. In Craig's narrative, the Pei-Kupe's interaction with Sylvester's portrait extends beyond the mere inspection. Rather, the Pei-Kupe assumes an active role by offering himself as a model, painstakingly reproducing on paper the intricate web of lines that adorn the faces of his immediate kin. Through this act, he emphasizes the scriptural divergences that set these representations apart from the likeness captured in his own visage. And here we have a reproduction of the facial diagram that the Pei-Kupe himself produced, the self-portrait of the Pei-Kupe for his British interlocutors. Still further, I quote, 11th quote, to illustrate his meaning, he would delineate on paper with a pen or pencil the corresponding marks in the amokos of his brother and his son, and point out the difference between these and his own. But it was not only the portion of the decoration which he called his name, with which Tupai was familiar. Every line, both on his face and on the other parts of his body, was permanently registered in his memory. So the Pei-Kupe demonstrates a remarkable capacity to recall every intricate detail of the tattoos that symbolize and simultaneously announce the presence of his beloved family members to the world. By committing these embodied facial diagrams to memory, the Pei-Kupe engages in an act akin to communing with his loved ones in absentia. There is, someone quoted Pliny the Elder, I think it was Giovanni Panizzi. Pliny the Elder traces, as you know, in the book, I think it's 34th book of the Naturalis Historia, the Natural History, the origin of portraiture in Greek culture as an iconic and visual response to the fear of death. We love someone, we're afraid that the face of the someone will disappear forever because of death, and so we create a portrait of that face. This is the origin of the portrait according to Pliny the Elder in Greek cultures. But the moko, or a moko, function as a mnemonic device in its own right. However, the semiotic gap between the signifier and the signified, the medium and the inscription, the expressive matter and the substantive content, as Hemslund has said, is considerably reduced. Whereas a portrait represents a beloved face, the moko represents, or even presents it, as it becomes an inseparable part of the flesh that bears it. It is important to note that the Pei-Kupe reproduces the design of his own facial tattoo for the sake of European comprehension, as those within the Maori community and culture view the moko as indistinguishable from the very face it adorns. From the point of view of Maori culture, this moko on paper, and even this moko on the screen, doesn't make any sense. It is reproduced there for, let's say, another civilization to look at and to inspect. But the moko is the face, and the face is the moko. They are inseparable. They cannot work apart from each other. So it was exactly at this juncture, within the pages of Craig's The New Zealanders, that this illustration emerges, likely observed by Melville and igniting his vibrant imagination, serving as a wellspring for the creation of Queequeg's character and visage. The symmetrical arrangement of lines that encase the Maori's countenance may have been perceived by contemporary observers as mere adornments. And that was the immediate reaction, and probably this is also our ignorant reaction toward what we called the Maori facial tattoo. It is an adornment. Of course it is not an adornment. It is not a decoration. It is a different way of conceiving meaning. Very much different from the Western way of conceiving meaning. So these patterns, delineated in black on white and ink on face, appear to embody that meaning of order ascribed by Gombrich to the ultimate significance and evolutionary function of decoration in Western figurative culture. But Gombrich's reading would not work with this particular decoration. This is not a decoration. This is not a visual pattern, but a visual medium that serves a different purpose. It's not the purpose to capture any deviance from the norm, that is Gombrich's hypothesis, as you recall. In the case of facial moko, this anthropological function finds expression in capturing both individuality and the interplay of familial and communal bonds within a graphic configuration. Now, there is an interesting story, but I'll go very fast through it because I want to show you my Maori ancestor. As you see, in the 17th century, the Maoris, according to this depiction of Isaac Gilsemans, would have exactly my hair, so this way of, and exactly my beards. And this is a portrait of the very first, is a representation, visual representation of the very first encounter between Western explorers, as they would be called at that time, but they were in fact colonizers, and Maoris. Isaac Gilsemans was indeed the artist and painter on the Endeavour. You remember the Endeavour? I had once an Endeavour Award in Australia, and I was very proud of becoming an Endeavour visiting professor at Monash University. And then, unfortunately, I realized that Endeavour was the name of the ship that James Cook's was leading to Australia and to New Zealand. But this is before Cook, because this is actually a drawing that was created by this artist, Isaac Gilsemans, who was on the ship of another navigator and explorer, also a colonizer. It was a Dutch one, and his name was Abel Janszoon Tasman. You know Tasmania, so Tasmania derives his name from the first Dutch colonizer who arrived close to the shores of New Zealand. It was a very violent encounter because the Maoris felt attacked, of course, and reacted, and they killed some of the explorers. But there is a particular visual element that should really be striking in this representation. What is the particular element in this visual representation, in this image? In the very first image of an encounter with Maoris executed by Isaac Gilsemans in 1642 aboard the ship of Tasman. It's a drawing that is now in the New Zealand National Library. What is the visual element that strikes you?
Right.
Say?
Right.
Yeah?
Right.
Well, there is writing, of course, because there is a caption. So it's because this is actually made by Western artists, so there are the captures saying what is what. You know, it's a very didascalic, didactic image. No, it's another element. What is the element?
The black.
Huh?
Black.
Well, the flags are just signaling the fact that it's a Dutch vessel.
The Maori are on the foreground?
Yeah, but you know, they are in the foreground because they are the protagonists of the story. So they are, you know, attacking the. It's also a way of giving more force and power to the representation. No, it's very striking. Huh?
There are no tattoos.
They have no tattoos on their faces. Very good, very good. And why? Why don't they have tattoos on their faces? Because maybe at that time the Maoris would not actually have tattoos on their faces. In 1642, when this drawing was first made, probably in this first encounter with Maori people, tattoos were not there, or probably they were not seen because they were not known. You know, you have read Kant and the Platypus by Umberto Eco. You know, like people see what they know and represent what they know more than what they see. So probably these beards are maybe not beards, you know, maybe they're just a way of interpreting visually something that was unknown, you know, the facial tattoos. But there are also other historical hypotheses that the Maori tattoos emerged as a conflictive pattern, so as a pattern, facial pattern that became fashionable when Maori tribes started to have conflicts among themselves. And maybe, who knows, started to have conflicts among themselves exactly because they were visited by Westerners. So something to be explored. But certainly in this second drawing, also an early drawing, but this time made by an artist on Captain Cook's endeavor, we see clearly that there is a representation of something that resembles a facial pattern. So Cook in his logbook writes, quotation 15, "The bodies and faces are marked with black stains they call amoko, broad spirals on each buttock. The ties of many were almost entirely black. The faces of the old men are almost covered. By adding to the tattooing, they grow old and honorable at the same time." And this is another representation by Sidney Parkinson, 1769. I skip. And in the description that accompanies this drawing, also by Cook, we read, "As to the tattooing, it is done very curiously in spiral and other figures, and in many places indented into the skins, which looks like carving. Through at a distance it appears as if it had been only smeared with a black paint." So I have to resume a little bit, and I don't want to be too long, but this is an autograph in the form of a reproduction of a facial tattoo. The first one, actually, that a Maori chief produced for the colonizers in March 9th, 1855. It was the Maori chief Temoraga using a pen. It was the first time that they were using a pen, of course, aboard the ship named Active on this particular date. And the colonizers actually learned very fast that this was not just decoration, that this was not just a facial adornment, that this was a kind of a signature. Because then we start to come across later on these documents. This is an example of a contract signed by Maori chiefs and Western settlers. The original in particular is in the possession of Dr. Oken Dunedin, New Zealand, a grant signed by Tuamaki, a chief of Otago. He was a great enemy of Rauparaha, etc., etc. So why were these contracts signed? Of course they were signed so that the Maori chiefs could bestow their land to the colonizers. And they weren't using their signature, they were using their Maori portrait. This is described very well in a terrible book which is called A View of the Art of Colonization. A View of the Art of Colonization. Just think about how colonization could be called, you know. Published in 1849, by Edward Gibbon Wakefield, that was one of the theorists of colonization and the protagonist of the systematic conquest of New Zealand territory by the British colonizers. If you are a very devoted Marxist theorist, you know that Edward Gibbon Wakefield is mentioned in chapter 33 of The Capital by Marx and criticized by Marx as one of the theoreticians of a modern colonization. So I have to go a little bit fast. These facial tattoos appeared as very shocking to the British colonizers, the Dutch colonizers, and they appeared also very shocking to Melville, although Melville then somehow reverts the cultural stereotype. But this cultural stereotype has very long roots, very distant roots. And the initial root, probably, of the story of stigmatization of tattoos in general, and especially of facial tattoo, is Leviticus 19:28, in that third book of the Pentateuch that the Jews called Vakira, and he called, which in the King James is translated as follows: "Ye shall not make any cuttings in your flesh for the dead, nor print any marks upon you. I am the Lord." But more recent translations, and thus subsequent to the introduction of the term tattoo in the English language, explicitly mention the tattoo. For instance, the New King James, published in 1982, which renders the same passage as follows: "You shall not make any cuttings in your flesh for the dead, nor tattoo any marks on you. I am the Lord." Indeed, the term tattoo was adopted by English quite early, in the 18th century. The Greeks, so I'm going to read some Greek for you, my friend, because the Greeks would not have a specific word for tattooing, of course, because they hadn't had any contacts with oceanic cultures. So in the Septuaginta, or Septuaginta, the passage of the Leviticus is translated as follows: "Kai entomidas epi psyche upoiesete en to somati iumon, kai grammata sticta upoiesete en umin ego eimi curios o theos iumon." Sorry, just have a classic pronunciation. So the word for tattoo is...
Doesn't exist actually.
Where is it? Grammata sticta. Very good. Grammata sticta. And the Romans didn't have a word for tattoo either. The Vulgate, and it's very interesting that they didn't have a word, because the Romans didn't have a word either. So the Vulgate, the Latin translation of the Bible, when it translates into Latin grammata sticta, it says: "Et super mortuo non incidetis carnem vestram, neque figuras aliquas, et stigmata facietis vobis ego dominus." So, tattoo for the Vulgate is the stigmata. And this is very interesting, because it's going to engender an enormous cultural, let's say, clash and crossroad. But let me go towards the long conclusion. In the Leviticus verse, the reference to cuts on the body, tattoo marks and separation converge to intimate to the Jews that if they intend to respect their God, they should not draw marks on their bodies, not even, and indeed especially on the occasion of a mourning or funeral ritual. The commentaries on the verse are innumerable. Referring to them all here would be impossible, also because I have to run a little bit. But I've read all the biblical commentaries on this passage, from the first fathers of the church until now. And what is striking is that there is a Protestant approach to the problem, which is very close to the Jewish one. You don't have to mark your skin, as, for instance, Matthew Henry, Calvinist Theological Observance, writes in his concise commentary, 1706. But also, later on, John Ellicott, a British Anglican pastor, of Arminianist Theological Observance, Old Testament Commentary, 1897. They both say what the Jews would say. You should not mark your skin. The only difference is that in this case the author uses the word tattoo, because the word tattoo has been in use in English language. But then if you take the Catholic commentaries of the same passage, there is a different story. So the Catholic commentators say, yeah, of course, it is taboo to tattoo your face. It can be an idolatrous practice, but at the same time, as this author, Haydock, Catholic, writes in 1811, Christians have sometimes, quotation 33, marked their arms with the cross or name of Jesus, as Saint Jane Frances de Chantal did her breast. The church historian relates that Saint Francis, Saint Catherine received miraculously the prints on his wound. So the perspective is different because, of course, Catholic saints have stigmata sometimes. And so they have mark on their skin. So it cannot be completely forbidden. There must be a different semiotic ideology allowing these tattoos. So I don't have time to go through the Jewish commentaries on this passage. That are very elaborate, like there is no one like Jewish rabbis debating on the illicity of a practice. But they go from a very orthodox stance in which even if you have a scar and then you used some burnt powder to try to heal the scar and it looks like ink, that is idolatry, because it looks like you have been writing on your skin, although you just wanted to cure your illness, your wound. And on the other end of the spectrum, there are other, let's say, a little bit more flexible rabbis who say, well, it's not that you cannot write on your skin, you can write on your skin, but it doesn't have to make any sense. And others say, well, it's not important if it makes sense. The only thing that matters is that you don't write the name of another deity on your skin. But this is not the version that is followed by Halakha, because it's too bland. So, what is the conclusion of all this? The conclusion is that very remotely in time, the Jews adopted a semiotic ideology according to which meaning should not be written on the skin, because meaning should be written only in the Torah, should be found only in the Torah. So every other source of writing external to the Torah, and especially on a body, would have been judged as a possible source of idolatry. Then the Greeks adopted this semiotic ideology that is actually the main topic of Derrida's grammatology. Adopted it and passed it to Roman commentators. Then Christians adopted it, and Protestants especially, in the clash with the Catholics, reinstated and underlined the semiotic ideology of the impossibility and the illicit character of having one's body as a surface for meaningful writing. The Catholics make some exception, but they make some exception only in exceptional cases. The relics, the stigmata, Jesus, exceptional encounters, mystical encounters. All this semiotic ideology then travels throughout the ages and arrives in a very strange moment and strange place in the world and in history, in the encounter between British, first Dutch and then British colonizers, who were completely who had completely absorbed this semiotic ideology. This semiotic ideology was their second semiotic nature. And the Maoris, who didn't have the Bible, who didn't have the Torah, who had never developed writing. It's one area of the world where writing was never developed as we know it. And the clash of semiotic ideologies stemmed from there, from the fact that the British colonizers, the British explorers, did not understand the importance of these facial tattoos, the fact that they would represent a different way of anchoring the meaning in a society. So not anchoring it into an external object, a device, a book, the Torah, which becomes a body, a certain kind of a body, you know, in Jewish culture, but to anchor the meaning in one's body through the tattoo. And that gave rise to different phenomena. One phenomena is this one. These are some Instagram filters that allow people to try Maori tattoos. Instagram, of course, prohibited these filters after the entire Maori community protested. But this Instagram filter was created exactly with the same ideology that was born like many centuries ago in the creation of the Judeo-Christian semiotic ideology of writing, and was then perpetrated and continued and passed on throughout the centuries. The idea that I can try on my face another culture's writing. My old friend, now deceased, Michael Silverstein, would call it a process of entextualization of culture. So I extract just the signifier, because I have in my semiotic ideology the idea that signifier and signified are severable. And we, semioticians, are exactly like the British explorers, are exactly like the Dutch explorers. We are also the son and daughters of that long history of semiotic ideology. We cannot understand very well what the Maori tattoo is if we think about it in terms of signifier and signified, expression and content. But at the same time, there is hope, dear friends. In 2016, Nanaya Sibele Mahuta became the first Maori woman to display a moko kawawe, a female moko, in Parliament in New Zealand. But 2016, my friends, so not too long ago. And was subsequently promoted from Associate Minister of Housing and Maori Affairs to one of the highest ministerial portfolios, that of Foreign Affairs. And she still, you know, when I was writing this text, she was still the Minister for Foreign Affairs of New Zealand. The moko, she said, is a statement of identity, like a passport, told Mahuta to The Guardian in 2016. I am, at the time in my life, she continued, where I'm ready to make a clear statement that this is who I am and this is my position in New Zealand. Thank you very much for your attention.
We can now have some comments and feedback or questions from the audience. Yes, please.
Maybe you can hear me. Okay. Thank you. There were a lot of things. I will try to stay strict. The first one, if moko, yes, are kind of cultural fingerprints, that would be my definition. That how do they get with the concept of disguising? Do they have anyone? And is it similar to ours? The other thing is, for us, the very idea of becoming old, it's associated with change, face changing. how do they get, how do they deal with it? And last remark, Saussure himself was a kind of Maori, I think, because he always said that you don't have signifier and signified if not as two faces of the same thing. And then it's maybe some kind of successive semiotics that consider signifier and signified as separable, but Saussure was a kind of Maori, I think. Thank you.
I don't know about Saussure's Maoriness. I would say that already conceiving a dualism is not exactly in line with the Maori semiotic ideology, because he might well say that there are two faces of the same sheet of paper or the same coin, but for the Maori there is one face. So this is the difference. It is the same problem that we have with our fellows Muslim believers, when we tend not to understand why the Quran cannot be translated. It cannot be translated because it has one face and not two faces. So the only face of the Quran is the Arabic one. So you can translate it, but as a sort of a concession to cultures who do not actually read the original language of the Prophet. But the semiotic ideology of Christianity, it is one that is based on translation. It doesn't matter at all in what language you read the Gospels. You know, the important thing is that you get the message. So there is a very strong idea of separation between expression and content there. As regards the getting old, this is something that was, if I remember well, was underlined since the very first encounters with Maori people. Maybe it was already in the travelogue of James Cook. The fact that getting old means an accumulation of lines on your face and on your body. So the more you get old, the more you write your identity through this accumulation of diagrammatic accumulation on the face. So it's a progressive intensifying. And the first question is the most difficult one. You know, I can answer only tentatively by saying that the Maori culture doesn't have the same understanding of not only visual meaning but also social meaning that is inscribed in portrait, as I said, but also the idea of visual and social meaning that is inscribed in the device and concept of the mask. Because your question is on the mask. But again, you know, that will require another lecture, you know, like the way in which we have misunderstood masks as Western commentators, the way in which Levi-Strauss misunderstood masks in his readings of the man. Monumental, beautiful, but it was completely pervaded with this semiotic ideology I'm talking about. You know, looking for meaning in masks all the time, looking for the signifier of the signifier. So I would say that in that case too, not only there isn't any idea of having two faces, one behind the other, there isn't either the idea of having a simulacrum of a face that can somehow purport that you have a face that you are not. You are the face that you show, and you show the face that you are all the time, because it's a community understanding of meaning. So you are never an individual subtracting yourself to the other. So this is the mask case. There's no disguise. Yeah. Not in the same way.
Thank you, Massimo. It was really very interesting and very rich. I'd like to think about, come back about the interpretation, the link between the interpretation of the Torah and the interpretation of sign. Because I was thinking that it's a sort of way to be coherent in a very complex system of thinking, because Torah gives a very large space to the empty sign, the absence. What is lacking is the opening to the interpretation. So my question is, there is a sort of link between the way in the tradition, religion traditions, we think writing, and the way we let to appropriate writing to the community.
Oh, definitely, yes, this is a central issue, absolutely. Well, first of all, it has to be said that it's a passage that, of course, I haven't read because I've prepared a too long text as always, but you cannot really understand this choice of the, let's say, Jewish semiotic ideology if not in contrastive terms. The first mention of what then we would call tattoos in Western history dates back to Herodotus. Herodotus actually, by talking about other peoples, other populations, other cultures, and in particular talking about the Scythians, he says that they have this habit of marking with writing in ink and burning their skin during mourning, for mourning. So it was also, since the beginning, a contrastive strategy and a strategy of differentiation. So in order to build the community, in order to build the semiotic identity of the Jewish people, it was important to develop a wholly different understanding of meaning, and a wholly different understanding of how meaning circulates within the community. And it doesn't circulate associated with the body. There must be always a difference between a separation. The word that is used in the Bible to designate this act of putting ink on the skin appears only once in the Bible, and it has only one. There is only one other word in the Jewish Bible that is etymologically related to that word, and it's a word that designates a geographical part of Ethiopia that is separated from the rest of the land. So, in the etymology of the tattoo in the Jewish Bible, and in the etymology of this other word that is the only one that resembles to the word, there is this idea of separation. So if you write on your skin, you're going to be separated. You're going to be haram, which is separation again. So it is something that somehow institutes the way of circulation of meaning within the Jewish community by differentiating it by the ways in which meaning circulates, especially in this very topical moment of passage between life and death, which is mourning. It is exactly in those moments that your deity must not be on your skin, must be in a secret place, in a place that can be read, but it cannot be seen.
Yeah. A short question. Was there something like a dictionary was made by anthropologists about the Maori tattoo?
Sorry?
Was made something like a dictionary about Maori tattoo by the anthropologists?
Making a dictionary would be again probably misunderstanding the way in which the Maori Moko functions semiotically. I think that, quoting and making reference to Umberto Eco, maybe an encyclopedia of the Maori tattoo could be written, but not a dictionary of the Maori tattoo, because the cultural reference of the Maori tattoo is not the equivalent of a verbal language. It is the equivalent of a verbal language that is enmeshed with a whole culture. So you cannot find a, let's say, verbal counterpart, verbal equivalent of an element in the Maori facial tattoo. First of all, because the only the only reference that could work is Kripke's theory of proper names as what is it in English? As unique designators. So facial Maori tattoos work a little bit like Kripke understood in his logic of proper names. Proper names as designating just the self. Yeah. So he would be a dictionary of proper names, let's say.
But the elements, maybe. But maybe elements.
The elements are important indeed, because what you are suggesting, I think is a very good suggestion, is that there is not only, let's say, a lexical understanding of the Maori facial tattoo. There is also a syntactic understanding. And there is a syntax. But for instance, there is certainly symmetry. There are curves more than straight lines. Some curves are used more than others. There is a difference that is very strong. There is a gendered one between the female Maori tattoo, which is just in this part of the face, and the male one, which covers the face. So there is a syntax, there is a pragmatics, but the problem is with the semantics. We were talking about the semantics of the Maori tattoo, and then the misunderstanding was exactly about the meaning, the semantics, and also a little bit about the pragmatics, so how this meaning would be used in the community.
Any last questions for you, Massimo? So we understand that you mentioned in your talk there is no decorative association with these marks, but still it's unknown what they symbolize and what they mean. I mean, the lines, do they serve purpose, signify purpose? What was it that made them make these forms and shapes?
Well, I think that, again, if we ask ourselves the question, what do they mean?
Yes.
This is a Western question. Because it underlines, it implies the fact that they refer to something else. So they are a representamen in Persian terms that refers through an interpretant to an object. But the idea is to be within a culture in which this fundamental logics of semiotics, fundamental in Persian semiotics as well, collapses. So you don't have a representative and an object. You have a representative who is an object, that is an object. So you cannot really ask what does it mean, because it means itself. It cannot be detached from the person. It cannot be literally detached from the person because it's on the face. Now, other questions can be asked. So, like, why is it placed on the face? Why in the buttocks? Why on the thighs? Why in certain places? But the facial tattoo we were talking about, the one designating the singularity of the individual through this, collapse, this collapsing of representative and object. It cannot have any different interpretation because it is a presentation. It is a presentation of the self more than a representation of the self. Then, of course, one also has to add that the encounter with different cultures of meaning always transform the two cultures. So now even the Maori use moko in decorative ways, and they use them to mean something else, and they use them in a way that will be closer to the Western ways of decoration. But they've differentiated, so they have now two different words to designate the traditional Maori facial tattoo, which is sort of a diagrammatic, embodied self-portrait, and on the other hand, another word to designate the, let's say, corruption or even dissemination of that way of drawing for the purposes of global decoration intents. Yeah.
And it's only recent examples that show this differentiation between genders, male and female.
No, this apparently is traditional, but something that I wanted to just to conclude, because I told you in the beginning that there is a big difference between this impersonation, 1956, and this impersonation, 2010. So what is the difference according to you? The sign are different, yes, but there is something more.
Inside of
Hmm?
focus. Inside of focus.
Well, the main difference is that this guy is an Austrian actor, is Friedrich von Leeuwenhoek, impersonating a Maori character in the film that is adapting Melville's Moby Dick in 1956. And he's just an Austrian guy with his face decorated with signs that resemble a Maori moko. This is a Maori actor who actually presents his face. So this is the difference. And I think it's a good difference.
Thank you.
Just a comment about tattoos are common in indigenous cultures, worldwide, Australian, body markings. Good question, why did they die out? The terms on which, like much indigenous practices, they ended. But my main question goes back to your comment on Derrida. Are you willing to say, semiotically, that we're looking at a writing system, an inscription system? Are you willing to say anything like Derrida was arguing for looking beyond, the printed text?
Yeah, well, what I was arguing is that there is an intuition in de la grammatologie, Derrida's grammatology, that goes in the same direction of this paper, but goes also in the same direction of, let's say, the school of semiotic anthropology that was established by Silverstein in Chicago, and then notably followed by Webb Keane, who's a semiotic anthropologist, and he has commented on similar dynamics in the encounter between Dutch missionaries and the indigenous population of Sumba in Indonesia. Populations that were constantly accused of cherishing fetishes, of course. And fetishes, we know the origin of the word. We know also that Bruno Latour taught us that we are all a little bit fetishes, even in modernity, or factitious, as he proposed. But the main problem was that the Dutch missionaries too were trying to understanding the presence of these objects, sacred objects in the rituals of the population of Sumba, according to this inevitably, well, we call it logocentric semiotic ideology, but I think we should characterize it. I think it's more than being a logocentric. It is a semiotic ideology of separation and separability. So the idea that actually an expression can travel separated from the content, and that if you deny that separability and that separation, you are a fetishist, because you don't recognize, for instance, the difference between adoring a painting and adoring the saint or Jesus represented in that painting. But this is a distinction that was introduced by Catholicism exactly to, somehow render this practice acceptable against the critiques of Protestants. Because actually, when you are adoring Jesus through a painting, you are adoring the painting as well. So there is something idolatrous in that. So my meaning is that this is a deeply ingrained understanding, even it's not even an understanding, it's a kind of a second nature, as I called it, that developed in what we call now Western cultures, but that part of Western cultures that was deeply influenced first by Judaism, then by Christianity, and especially by Protestant Christianity, that became the main religious ideology of modernity, and then capitalism, as we know. So it is exactly through that same logic that every kind of commodification of meaning can happen and take place. Everything that allows us to extract meaning from a certain culture and sell it, for instance. Sell it to tourists, sell it to the cultural industry. It is the same phenomenon, you know, it is denying the fact that culture is also a skill. And as a skill, you cannot strip someone of that, you know. It is a personal thing, it is attached to the individual, it is attached to the community. It is one way of understanding what meaning is. So I think that Derrida, in criticizing the logic of meaning that comes from a certain interpretation of the Bible and a certain tradition within the philosophical a very long philosophical path going from, you know, the establishment of the Jewish Torah until present-day theology, was pointing at something relevant in my terms. And this is why there was also, but that would lead us, I think, very much farther. There was a misunderstanding and a clash between Eco and Derrida. Eco was accusing Derrida of misleading Peirce. But of course it was misleading Peirce, because Derrida wanted to somehow show the ideology of Peirce. He wasn't trying to use Peirce to build the semiotics. He was trying to underline the fact that semiotics too has an ideology, and is the typical ideology of, let's say, our sciences, our social sciences. Sorry for the long answer. Your question was